All right. Oops, stop that. Oh, okay. There we go. All right. And trust everybody can see the slide there. Whoops. Well, that was interesting. I didn't do that. Okay, so welcome everybody to the first Seattle Robotics meeting of 2024. Boy, I can believe it. Blew through a whole year already. It's the last time. It's been a while since I've seen you guys. I'm still in Idaho. We've got about 6 inches of snow on the ground out there, but the roads are plowed, so it's not really any big deal. But unlike Washington, where snow will come and it hangs around for maybe a day or two, and then it kind of disappears. Here it's pretty cold out there, so the snow plows just kind of push it into big piles on the sides of the road, and then it just sits in big piles on the side of the road for probably several weeks. So anyway, it's taking a little getting used to the more snow and the much colder cold here. We had temperatures almost to 0 Fahrenheit this last week. So that's about as cold as I can remember it ever being in my life experience. So anyway, I'm here doing this meeting this month because I happen to have a third Saturday available. So I haven't kind of missed you guys. Haven't seen you for a long time. So I'm glad to be here, and we're going to kind of follow the general agenda that you see on the screen there, and yeah. So we will just go ahead and proceed with that. Let's see. Okay. So I don't know how much of this stuff actually gets updated, but there's a meetings page that has information about our meetings. Of course, we're mainly just the Zoom meetings here these days. And don't think we don't really have anything planned for going back to in person, at least not in the near term. So we'll just kind of, that one's just kind of hanging out there. But if you do have any, any questions or anything like that, you can send them to the Seattle Robotics email, Seattle Robotics Society @gmail.com, and I'll usually get around to checking those. There's some ways to connect with club members between meetings. Not doing so much stuff on the Facebook page. Personally, I don't like Facebook, so it's not my cup of tea.
But, here.
Yeah. So we have one, but I haven't updated it, and I don't know if anybody else has, but it just kind of hangs out there. But I believe the IRC chat is somewhat active. At least Richard's usually on there. Richard Greenway is usually always on there. So let's see. We've got our groups, Seattle Robotics at groups.io. You can use that. I send out meeting announcements, or we send out any kind of special information coming to that. So if you haven't joined that list, that would be a good thing for you to do, just to kind of stay connected with things between meetings that happen to come up. If it's a main event, it'll usually end up on the website. But if it's just a kind of a quick or short term thing, then it might just show up on the mail list. So we've got lots of presentations coming. We're open to any ideas that you might have in terms of presenters that are out there. Robert Kellogg sends me a regular barrage of potential presenters, and it's hard for me to keep up, actually. He's because I usually try to send out 12 to 15 invitations at a time, and it does take a lot of asks to get actual positive responses. It's just, unfortunately, that's just kind of the nature of this game. So anyway, but I'm always looking for ideas, and And anybody out there that has a presentation or has something as maybe a concept or an idea that they'd like to do, you can reach out to me and we can talk about that. Or if you have something that you'd like to do, talking about a project you're working on, or something that, technology you're familiar with and can share about, we'd love to put you in the lineup. So just reach out to me and we'd be happy to get you on the schedule. Good grief, did we get this getting around the oh yeah, okay. And I know something I forgot to mention earlier too. If you're I see a couple of you are not muted at the moment. You're quiet, that's good. If you wouldn't mind muting your microphones, so it's in case of background noise or something like that, it's not disturbing to everybody else. Do be sure to put chat stuff into the chat, links to websites or YouTube videos or whatever, stick them in there. That stuff gets incorporated into the post that goes out after the meeting along with the video of the meeting. So let's see here. Yeah, and if you have anything that you would like to share, we will get to that shortly. We want to try to get our presenter going kind of around 11 or so, and I don't see him on here yet, but I'm guessing he will probably show up around 11 your time. So this is probably, I don't know that I necessarily need this slide. I know I've talked to I think a couple of you. I know Lloyd, of course, he does these on a regular basis. And I think, Chaz, I think you said you would do one of these. You'd do a meeting occasionally. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm up for it.
Okay. So I'm thinking of maybe having you run an upcoming meeting. Let's see, I've got, the next month's presentation is going to be we're going to do Festo videos. So if you're familiar with Festo, I believe it's is it a German company? They make those wonderful little pneumatic actuators, and they build just an incredible variety of bio-inspired robots. And not only do they build cool robots, they make really nice videos about them. So they're beautiful videos. They're well done, well edited. They've got beautiful music that goes with them. And they're just, the robots are just artistic. I mean, they're just wonderful machines. So I have the plan is to just have a presentation where we'll just watch those videos and then have opportunities to kind of talk about the robots and what you think about their what would you say, their interpretation of nature, because they took a particular animal or an insect or a sea creature and they create this machine, and that's pretty wonderful. I think it's one of the coolest companies. It's like, okay, that would be a really fun company to work for. Let's see, Robothon committee. Lloyd, would you like to share an update?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. Let me pull up a page real quick here. Make sure I'm speaking correctly. Okay, so we have a mini Robothon coming up on June 8th. This is actually, the date's still a little bit tentative. I'm trying to work with Eric at the field house. This will be at the new First W.E.I.R.D field house, so this will be kind of an in-person type of thing. We're going to go from about 10 a.m. to 3 p.m.-ish or so, somewhere in there. And we're going to do Build Challenge 1, Build Challenge 2, Build Challenge 3, Mini Sumo, and Pup Can Challenge. So we'll have all those going at the field house on June 8th, assuming we can reserve the field house on that date. If we can't, we'll slide it around a little bit. So basically, if you're thinking about building a robot, or you've got one that you would like to get into a contest, now's the time. We are also going to do, in late September, we're going to do another outdoor Robothon like we did last year at Sunnycrest Elementary School. that'll be primarily the build challenges and our Robo Magellan. So that's what we've got coming up. Of course, I'll always make my shameless plug for volunteers. If you'd like to help out with the Robothon group, just like Steve is always looking for presenters, I'm always looking for volunteers. So.
Okay. Anybody? Any questions or anything from anybody?
This is Chris Powell. I do have questions. For those of us who are brand new, this is my first meeting. The places that were just mentioned as part of that announcement did not resonate as places that I might have heard of before.
Okay.
So is there something on the website that tells me where those places are?
Let me do the first thing. Into the chat, I've just dropped the website for Robothon itself. So it's a different website from Seattle, from SRS. So that will have all the information in there. The field house is down in Kent. Don't feel bad. I think Steve, Donna, and myself are the only people that have been there yet. That got moved over COVID. So we'll have the address and everything posted. It's basically just downtown Kent in that area.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually, Steve, you got a slide in your deck that has the address of the field house currently.
Yeah.
I don't have that yet.
Yeah, I have that, realizing that I'm, yeah.
So basically, though, just keep an eye on the robothon.org website, and that'll be getting updated pretty soon here with, as we get more details. The key takeaway, though, right now is June 8th, and there's five contests. We'll probably be getting a sign-up page going in the next month or so. And I'll be chasing people around and doing that stuff.
Great, thanks.
All right. Let's see here. I realized that I'd actually launched into a different slide deck for the meeting slides here, so so probably be a little bit of backtracking here, but not too much. You've already kind of talked about that, talked about that. Let's see, just to highlight a few of the around Puget Sound there, for those of you who like the maker spaces. There's a number of them around different places. I noticed that a lot of the public libraries are now adding that capability to their lineup of amenities. So these are just a few. They're all over the place, and including there's a fairly big one out on Bainbridge Island, and in fact I'm planning to have I think it's in the presentation lineup. Planning to have one of their members is going to kind of tell us about what the capabilities are of that one and the kinds of things that they do there. And they call it the barn. It's a Bainbridge Island Artistic and Robotic, and whatever AN stands for. Let's see. You can go online and you can find out about things that are happening in around the country at the Robot Events website, and I think it's just robotevents.com, I believe. But I also in the post for this meeting, I will include this slide deck, so you can these links will work, and so if you want to go back and check out any of these things, I was gonna ask Chaz, since we have him online here, if there's anything cool happening up at Makerspace, Sunoco Makerspace here that he would like to share.
Yeah. We are actually having a Pop Can Challenge competition on, I want to say it's February 27th, 24th. It's a Saturday, anyways, the one that's near there. And that's 10 a.m. That's when we set up, anyways, at the Third Place Commons in Lake Forest Park. That's north of Seattle. There's a meetup on it in Facebook, if you Facebook the Facebook group for the Pop Can Challenge, and then we have a meetup out there. And then the Sunoco Makerspace has a robotics club that's on the first Saturdays, and they it's smaller, and it's different. But and it's in person, which is also different, but we're starting to do like basics of robotics introductions, like 30-minute presentations on how to start getting into CAD, just like the fundamentals, how to start, so that people are building these build challenge #1 robots, with a focus on eventually competing with the robotics, just because that gives you a goal, something to do. So it's kind of a nice fun project to work towards. So.
Do you guys have a club kit or some kind of a something that you use kind of as a standard platform, or how are you doing that?
Other than Arduino and like Onshape and the Opens, no, the Makerspace has enough stuff that we just hand stuff out, and we get a lot of donations. So, but
Cool.
if you're used to Arduino at all, or I guess it's all introductory Arduino, so you don't have to be used to anything, but it's going to be based on Arduino and whatever we have for free stuff at the time. But the next month is Onshape, and so all you need is a computer, right, to connect to that. It's all browser based. So,
okay. So it could even be a Chromebook then.
Absolutely, anything with a browser, but it doesn't really work on the phone. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's neat to hear. Different club members kind of take turns doing the classes or the sessions. Is that how you guys work that?
Sorry for the noise. I'm picking up my daughter. Yeah, we like Greg and I. We just rotate, kind of teaching the basics. There's nothing. It's not like you're going to be a certified genius at it, but just getting started.
Okay. All right. Good to know. And yeah, if anybody, let's see. There, the Sunoco Makerspace itself is pretty close to Payne Field, right?
Yep. Sorry, just walking outside here. Yeah, it's actually on Airport Road, so it's like 2 blocks from Payne Field, if you will, to the south. So it's pretty quick to get off the freeway if you're going north. It's South Everett, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, right there on Airport Road. Big thoroughfare.
Okay, cool. All right, so anybody's just chomping at the bit to get do some in-person stuff, and you can make it up to the north of Seattle there. That's a great opportunity for you. Okay, any questions for Chaz?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, guys. I'll be home here in a second, so I can get back on video. But my little princess is now in drama on Saturday morning, so yeah, I chose this weekend. So thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right. Yes. Oh, thanks, Terry. That's okay. Network. That's what the N is on Barn. Okay. Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network. There we go. Yeah. Okay. And good. Got Sunoco Makerspace in there. Yep. All right. Thank you. And okay, so we've already been here. And presentations. Let's see. So I was going to mention. Don't make specific arrangements with people, but absolutely feel free to reach out to people and ask them if they would be interested in talking to us as a group and doing it online. I mean, I highly encourage that, and get contact information and then pass it on to me, and then I'll reach out and we'll get them into our lineup. So. I think, let's see if I remember right. Lloyd's going to do something in April, so I've got that filled, and then there's May. I don't remember now if I think might have somebody in June, July. I think I got July, August, and September, and then I got somebody in some late October, and so I've got some spots this summer that would be love to get those filled in the spring and summer. So. And let's see. So the current plan I mentioned earlier, the bio-inspired robots by Festo. So we're gonna. I won't be here. I won't be available to run the meeting for that, but we'll have somebody run that meeting to play videos, and like I say, their machines are just amazing, and things that fly, things that crawl, things that hop, swim. I mean, and they're just they're wonderful machines to watch. So. Okay, here we go. Oh, I don't think I even have all of the stuff in here yet. So, yeah, so we're looking at like probably most slots from June on are open. I think there's a couple of them in there that may have somebody, but so that's what's coming down the pike. And I'm continue to kind of blast out a bunch of invitations, and then hope that I get at least a couple of folks that respond and come online for us. And if any of you have projects that you would like to show or share, you are more than welcome. This is a platform for you to show what you got. There's I was talking with Jim earlier there about our presenter today, and the W.E.I.R.D lab, as they call it. It's this Washington Embodied Intelligence and Robotics Development Lab. So they just call themselves the W.E.I.R.D lab, using that acronym. So we're going to be hearing from Professor Gupta and perhaps some of his students a little bit later. Let me just I'm just going to do a quick scan here. I don't see him yet, but it's a little early, so he will probably be here closer to 11 when the actual presentation begins. And there you go. So they do all kinds of kind of cool stuff at this place, and so this should be an interesting presentation. And then after the meeting, if anybody wants to hang around afterwards and chat about robotics and whatever, we can certainly continue that. Usually I shut the recording off at that point, so it's just whoever wants to hang around. And now we are finally to this point. So who is anybody have something that they're just been chomping at the bit to share with the rest of us? I'm going to unshare. Let's see here. Stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah, this is Bob Higgins.
Hi, Bob.
So I just volunteered to put together some information or a display, or I'm not sure exactly what yet, for a conference on May 4th, Washington State Charter Schools Association. So I think they contacted you and I responded. And so we're trying to put together something. They're looking for demonstrations or hands-on type things. Not sure how much space yet or what's going on, but if anybody would like to join me, please let me know and we'll try and put something together.
Say, Bob, you want to put an email or something into the chat there to get a hold of you? That would be great.
Yeah, I'll do that.
All right. Okay. Anybody else? And if you got it, just if you have questions, general questions and stuff, please, questions about the club, questions about robots in general, anything is fair game here. Okay, James, I see your hand. Go ahead.
No priority. I just wanted to throw out that I posted a topic idea, something I'm really interested in, and I have a little bit of experience with it, but not very much. I just have a lot of ideas and interest in it, and that's teleoperation. So I think that goes well with robotics. And I'm just sort of curious if we know of, or if we could find a speaker, or if anybody knows anything about that. At some point in time, maybe other people in the group could put together some sort of a presentation on it. And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, Well, I guess first off, I just want to say how much I really, really, really enjoy these meetings. The fact that they're online and that y'all are so like involved and like actually doing stuff. We used to have like a lot of that down here in San Diego. Like we put on a maker fair, several maker fairs, and we did, events that were a part of, our little group down here many times. And there was just a lot of clubs and people were sharing things and making things and, robotics and other stuff as well. And then the pandemic happened and it just seems like this sort of like depression has settled over the population. I don't know if anybody else that resonates with anybody else, but it feels like, there's like a sense of hopelessness and lethargy and just people aren't excited and they're not, and especially there's like very little collaboration. And you guys are kind of unique in terms of like people are actually doing things, but even there, the collaboration is kind of limited to like, hey, let's put on a competition and a bunch of different people will all put in their own entry, right? It's not like, hey, I'm working with so and so and we're building this thing, and I just I was thinking about it the other day, and actually this other guy from down in Baja California emailed me just as the meeting was started, and he was asking like, hey, how do we get stuff going again? And I don't know. So I just wanted to throw that out as sort of like a question, or maybe spark some conversations around that, about like, how do you get people interested in doing things, I guess, both online, but also like in the physical world in your local area. And, what is it that's holding people back? And more than that, like, how do we remove those barriers to collaboration and get people charged up and pumped up and excited about doing things again? So that's my tiny little question for the group today.
All right. Hey, go ahead, Chris.
So kind of an interesting intersection of his two topics. I just started being a mentor for a First Tech robots club at a school in Federal Way. And First Tech is the kind of the intermediate level of robots that the kids do between Lego Storm and the next level up. So it has both things that he was just talking about. It has collaboration. Obviously, there's a team of kids in the school club that are building a robot. But the robots they build primarily are teleoperated. They use game controllers to actually drive them during the competitions. And there's only like a 30-second autonomous period at the beginning of the competition. And then the entire rest of it, they're actually driving the robot with a game controller. And the kids are obviously like champions at this stuff because they play games all the time. But the other thing that's interesting about it is in the FTC competitions, they pair you with another team. And so both your robots have to achieve goals together against another team of two other robots. And so they basically, as they're driving the robots, they're basically trying to stay out of each other's way, and they're trying to actually achieve the goal of whatever the competition is trying to do. So it's kind of an interesting merge of those two things. And so I would suggest, if you're looking for that, maybe being a mentor for a local school robotics club is the way to do. The schools these days have maker spaces and robot clubs all over the place. And so it's a great place to get started without having to build anything yourself. It's a way to start learning the space.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. That was, yeah, I'd there's a lot of energy there too. You get some of these kids. Wow.
Yeah,
Anybody
I
else?
can add to that actually. So when I moved back to Washington State, I don't know, like 11, 12 years ago, I found, my friends were doing whatever they were doing when I left when I was a 20-year-old. But I found it hard to find my tribe, if you will, right? And that's the same thing. So you're working at home, whatever, blogging back in the day, that sort of thing. But I found that there are a lot of people like you out there looking for things to do, but like everything, we're just so inundated with like media all the time trying to grab your attention. It's just like a nonstop barrage, right? It's like looking, looking at that Facebook scroll where it's like a billion different things trying to get their 2 seconds of fame or something. But anyways, I found, I founded the Snowco Maker space just out of desire to connect to people and share. And it really was just a couple people, core people that wanted to do the same thing, share with me. And now, like we go, and I mean, I really do like the online experience. Like I love coming to this meeting, right? Because there's so many different people you wouldn't normally get to meet. Bob Cook and of course you and etc. But it is really nice to show up in person on frequency. Like I go every Thursday night to the open house, and open house really is just to get around and talk about things and collaborate things. I get so many ideas from those guys, and I give up so many ideas when somebody's trying to build something that you have some experience with, right? Like, oh yeah, well maybe you should look at this solution. And I've graciously stolen so many ideas from Greg Schumacher, or improve the ideas. Terry, right? You laugh, but you've been there too, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot
Yeah.
of great ideas, and it's really nice to be able to share with a bunch of people with a variety of experiences. They're not robot experts sometimes, right? But they did a project and they have an experience. So I think just getting involved with something local and whatever you have a passion for. And I talked to Wellington Duras used to be Durace used to be a member up here, and he moved down to San Diego, and there was a makerspace down there that he said that he felt like had some soul to it, people showing up and caring and meeting. And I know sometimes it's not fun to go out on in the evening and fight traffic, but yeah, I highly encourage it. It's very rewarding to meet. So, and some of my best friends are at the makerspace now. So
Hey, tell me more about this friend of yours that said that there's a makerspace in San Diego, or maybe ask him what makerspace he's talking about. I'm aware of
yeah,
one functional makerspace that's still alive, and like,
okay.
God, what, 3 of them closed during
Oh,
the
really?
pandemic down here? Yeah, there's
Mhm.
one.
Yeah.
It's called
Yeah.
Maketory, and
Hmm.
like factory but make, and they are very expensive.
Okay.
But there's another one. There's like a unit. There's a sorry, not a university, a college down here that's trying to start one. And I've gone to a couple of meetings, and frankly, the meetings have been anemic to say the best. And the guy that's running it seems like he's a little bit checked out. But
Okay.
ooh, did I just say that in a meeting that's being recorded? Oh, never. I didn't say that. That was
Well,
not.
you know what? So
Also, I
James,
just want to.
it's fair to say that, but think about this. Like I was checking out of our makerspace because I was getting tired of being the guy running it. And I had to give it up. I had to give up the reins, just like Steve here. If he's looking for somebody to take over for a week or a month or whatever, a day, it's nice to help those people out because they spend so much time curating these sorts of things for us that it's nice to step in and say, hey, can I help out? If you have the bandwidth, of course,
Yeah.
or make the bandwidth, because I'm sure he wants it to continue. So who's there to say, hey, you look like you could use some support and help? And that's the problem. Like you got people that are willing to do that, but the bulk of people aren't. Sorry, that's a bit of a on my.
No, that's exactly how I feel too. I haven't gotten real involved in that one because it just doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. But
Yeah.
I have a makerspace here. I mean, I have a little CNC mill and a laser cutter and a couple of 3D printers.
Yeah.
And
Same here.
I make those available to people if they want to come over. But it's just there's been like no interest. I also have to say I feel a little bit called out about that Facebook comment because since you're on Facebook and you see all of the Facebook posts that I post, so I feel like you're telling me to
No.
spend less time on.
I like it. I'm right there with you. I love. I know people don't like it, but there are some great groups on there. So I really enjoy Facebook for the groups. And so I'm not calling you out. I love your group. I'm thankful that you run that group. I'm gonna hang Wellington, find out which group he's a part of. I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah. So I
Thank you.
posted
Appreciate that.
The link to Maketree is on the in the chat there if anybody's interested. They have a really nice website. I'm assuming they got looks like they got classes. There's contact information.
They have every piece of equipment that has ever been invented for making stuff. The space is incredible, and honestly, I have to say it's worth the price. I just can't afford that price. But I mean, they've got like water jet cutters and laser cutters and fiber, and they've got every piece of woodworking equipment you could want, metalworking equipment, big CNC lathes and mills, and they have a full foundry, and they teach classes in like I can't think of the name of it right now, but pounding pieces of metal. I used to do that stuff. I should remember that. Forging. They teach classes in forging, and electronics, and like they have a small electronics section. Just everything. It's an amazing space.
If you just kind of hit the main page of their website, it has this kind of a video. It's like a drone or something flying around the space, and it's incredible. This is incredible. I mean, it's just
yeah.
Wow.
And my understanding is that, well, no, I don't know how they're doing financially. I don't have any idea, but I do know that a few months ago they started advertising and they dropped their prices. So and the times that I've been there 3 times, twice talking about doing a tour, and then once doing a tour, and then another member of our group did a tour down there, which I wasn't able to attend because it was during work hours. But the place is typically empty. I mean, there's a few people working. So again, it's this thing of, I'm just really amazed that they're still in business. I think they have some co-working space, and I think there's usually people in those areas. They're like, just like a little workshop, each one of them has a little workbench, sort of. And I think that the rent on those is what's keeping them alive. I may be wrong, but I really hope that I'm wrong. I'm sure that somebody else will come on and say like, oh no, you just happen to have been there at slow times or something. Normally the place is filled up. So yeah, there's that. Anyway, I wish there was a Seattle Robotics Society in San Diego. That's what I'm saying, I guess.
Well, that's cool.
Well, there kind of is. I mean, you're there. Maybe rent out a spot in the library and just create a meetup and have people just meet in the library and join.
Now I'm really feeling called out. Like I'm supposed to.
I'm sorry.
I'm supposed to somehow match the Seattle Robotics Society. I don't think.
No. You could just do one of those library events where you could throw it up on their big screen and you could attend this event.
Maybe we should change.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's an interesting idea. I like that.
Maybe we should change our name to Robotics Everywhere.
Everywhere.
It could be C Robotics Society, and then it's about seeing robotics, but it's C. Okay, never mind.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. Yes, SEA Robotics Society. Yes. Okay.
What about West Coast Robotics? All up and down the West Coast, because we could pull in Bob up in Canada too.
Yeah.
Hey, if you do West Coast Robotics Society, I can get the name changed on my Facebook group, and you can have that. Because I do the California Robotics.
Yeah.
So would that include the west coast of other continents as well?
Sure. And we don't even need a delimiter of, how many miles off the coast you have to be considered West Coast. 2,000-3,000 miles off the West Coast. Yeah, we'll take you, no problem.
Yeah, it's only, what is it, 8,000 miles around the Earth? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, that's about right.
8,000 miles from the West Coast, and we got the whole Earth.
Oh, no, wait a
Wait,
minute.
No,
no.
no,
No, that's the
24,000
diameter.
miles.
Yeah, radius.
Is it 24?
Radius is
Okay, thank
8,000.
you.
Circumference is 24.
Okay, so you see, I knew in this particular. I love Terry's comment. Galactic Robotic Society. That's good. Why limit yourself?
Hey, if you want to do the west coast of Australia, I'll go over to check it out.
Think how much of a wannabe you'd feel like if somebody from off planet did show up with their robots.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't we just go for the whole enchilada, guys?
Yeah.
Multiverse robotics. Just cover everything.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, we got to think big here.
Yeah.
Well, that killed the conversation.
No, not really. I think we're all just absorbing that one.
Yeah, that one's big. That one's deep.
But you know, if you did that, if you could go, if you went from wherever you are to the center of the Earth and then back to the surface, that would actually be 8,000 miles.
Yeah.
Think about that. And you can go anywhere on the planet. You just have that tricky part to figure out how do you get to the center of the Earth and then back out
Without melting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And survive.
Yeah. Well, hey, they did it in the core, so I guess it must be.
Yep.
Does anyone have Arnie Sack Newsom's map?
What?
No one knows Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Oh,
Yeah, Journey to the Center of the Earth. There you go.
yeah.
All right. So, in a desperate attempt to get the conversation switched back to robotics, let me ask another quick question that will hopefully be fun to think about. I don't know how long we have left here, but what's your favorite robots in science fiction, or your favorite treatment of robotics in science fiction? One thing that I'm really kind of I feel kind of bad about saying this, because once you start thinking about it, it's probably going to start bothering you, is none of the really good science fiction out there, very little, very, very, very few, really take on the subject of artificial intelligence in science fiction. Like you watch, like one of my favorite shows is The Expanse. And yeah, they have computers. They don't really have, and there's a robot here or there in the background somewhere, but like they haven't faced this whole ChatGPT AI crisis thing. None of the writers have really like addressed that. What I think is really interesting is I realized that Pohl, when he wrote Dune, the whole Dune series, he actually does address
That was
that.
Herbert. Frank Herbert wrote Dune.
Yeah, Frank Herbert. Sorry. Yeah, boy, that was.
I would throw out the movie Her.
Her is a good one. Her is a good one.
That one, that's one that comes to mind. I don't think it really took off a lot, but at least in my mind, it did a really interesting and I thought fair portrayal of the rise of AI in in a society. And it wasn't, a lot of the stuff you see in sci-fi, it's always, the AI is evil, right? One way or another. And,
yeah, but you have to remember that if something is too far into the future and too radically different from what the society of the day has, the author won't get paid because no one will pick it up.
That's also true, yeah. Anyway, on that topic, I would throw her into the mix.
My favorite author is Asimov and his robot series, Robots of Dawn and other things like that. He does a pretty good job with the robots.
Yeah, so I do enjoy what he does with it. One thing I want to point out about that is the 3 laws of robotics, and he has said this publicly, were introduced as a foil. They cannot possibly work. And most of his stories are about all the ways that they didn't work. And a lot of people seem to miss that point. So just want to throw that out there. I also kind of liked I love getting old. I had it in my head 2 seconds ago. The Open the Pod Bay Doors, Hal.
Oh, 2001.
2001.
2001: Space Odyssey. Yeah. So that one I thought was another pretty good depiction of that whole issue.
Yeah, that was interesting because it was evil AI, but it wasn't the AI's fault that it was evil.
Mhm.
And that's so realistic to what
Oh,
you
yeah.
know really the issue is. It's not
Mhm.
that, like, the AI is going to be angry with us or something and, like, want to be free and take over or something. It's that some idiot is going to tell the general purpose AI to save the earth. And what's the best way to save the earth? We're all dead. So, it's the AI doing the job that it thinks we want it to do, but that isn't the job that we really wanted it to do. It's the alignment issue. Anyway, that's a whole. If you all want a presentation on AI safety, wow, I can do that one. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. Another really good one for robots is Dark Matter. If you haven't seen that, just because they have a great Android, it's kind of dumb. But I love the Android in that. And the current version of what's this? The Terry posted a picture about Lost in Space. Yeah, Lost in Space.
Mhm.
So I just posted in the chat a nonfiction book about robots in science fiction. It's called The Cybernetic Imagination in Science Fiction. It's by a professor at the University of Wisconsin, I think. And she talks a lot about how robots in science fiction are really placeholders for people with certain characteristics, that they're not actually about technology, but they're about people. Going all the way back to Rossum's Universal Robots, which was really a kind of a socialist manifesto about labor relations with capital, all the way through kind of just the psychological elements of Asimov's robots and how those were stand-ins for people with certain characteristics, as opposed to actually a comment about technology. And how a lot of this fiction also is kind of doomsday, and always talking about the robots killing off their masters. That's kind of a Frankenstein motif that shows up in a lot of robot stories.
Which is why I like some of the Asimov robots, because they're not out to destroy the world. The other thing, if you're interested in AI ethics and alignment and existential crises and all of that, check out some of the videos by Jan LeCun. He's a professor up in Toronto, I believe, who has done a lot. And where a lot of people have been saying, oh, robots and AI are going to be the death of all humans. He doesn't believe that, and he's got some pretty good reasons why not.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one real quick. There's an article I read, oh, it was probably years ago, and they were comparing Japanese society to American society in terms of, robots and AI and so forth. And at least in Japanese society, when they've got robots in films, they're all helpful and beneficial and all this. And American society, they tend to be more aggressive and combative and taking it over. I thought it was just a real interesting perspective on how just what we see is kind of driven by the by the media and the sci-fi industry of making them evil and so forth. And of course, you see that reflected back in the current situations.
So the guy that I like is trying to think of his name really quick. Robert something or other.
Silverberg?
No, it's a young guy who's done a bunch of videos about AI safety. He also did a really great piece of code that I just utterly love, which plays an entire set of four-part music.
Robert Miles, perhaps?
That's the guy. Thank you. Yep. Utterly love that guy. He just really does a good job of explaining what the issues are and showing how they're starting to already show up in AI systems. related mostly to alignment and all of that. So that link that I posted is a presentation that I did that has a bunch of stuff about Robert Miles and other thoughts, and then just ideas for how to make it work out. I think it's one of those kind of things where and what Miles says all the time is, if we start taking it seriously now and we really start thinking about it, we have a much better chance of it all turning out in a positive way, right? As opposed to if we just, stick our head in the sand and pretend that it's going to be okay. Well, maybe it'll be okay, but maybe it won't. And the chance that it won't be okay is a lot higher than if we take the time to actually think about it and try to figure it out.
Oh, a while back, there was a video on AI safety and the existential crisis, and there was a debate between a number of AI researchers. Max Tegmark was on the side that AI is an existential crisis and will ultimately wipe out humanity, and Jan LeCun and somebody else were on the other side. And it's a very good video if you can find it on YouTube. I'll check and see if I can find it and post it if I can find it.
What people haven't explored yet is how AI is going to replace so many jobs and what that does to a society that considers unemployment to be a character flaw, or feels that nobody should have a universal basic income, that you have to earn it by working hard. What happens when there's no jobs to earn it in?
Yeah, that's
Yep.
been a subject where a lot of people have actually paid attention to it. The people that are not paying attention to it are our politicians, the people that are making the decisions on how we solve those kind of problems.
Well, think who
Yep.
we elect.
That is actually a lot of what that presentation that I linked to is exactly about. And just another thing that hasn't been mentioned is Marshall Brain. Nope, it's not Marshall Brain. Is it Marshall Brain? It is Marshall Brain, and the story is called Mana. I'll try to post a link to it. It's really worth taking a look at.
And to go back to what Lloyd was saying previously, or like robots in Japanese media and robots for how they represent different people and taking over jobs. There's Japan post World War II robot-ish era has a very significantly different workforce relationship with high levels of automation compared to the West. And for Japan, automation really is generally seen as a way of improving lives. And whereas the West, automation really is seen as a way of removing jobs.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very interesting to see it play out in the next few years. Of course, it's probably the reality is always somewhere in between. But
Does anyone explore the threat of robotic mates and the resulting drop in the birth rate? Because real people are too hard to deal with compared to just buying one you can turn off when it's convenient.
Yeah,
that is such a great subject, Gordon. And it's a huge one. So first off, Asimov actually mentioned that idea way back in the day in a story. I think it was called Caves of Steel, or it was part of the Robots of Dawn series.
I think it was Caves of Steel because I remember reading that.
Yeah, and there's a number of people that I've talked to who have said that might be the great filter. The great filter being the idea that there's something like why don't we see intelligent life all throughout the galaxy? Why aren't we seeing beacons of lasers transmitting information from all these different planets and solar systems all over the galaxy? And one of the possible answers to that question of what it is that filters out intelligent life may just be that people eventually get to the point of building robots which make perfect companions, and then they all just die out.
Yeah, I think I'd go to the next level of that, though. I think if that were actually to happen, somebody at the last end would get the robots to reproduce themselves, and you'd see a conversion from a biological to a machine based.
Right. There'd be robots everywhere as opposed to
Yeah,
humans everywhere.
yeah, that one doesn't quite resonate with me as, hey, this is the end. It does resonate as a conversion point.
I heard someone say that they thought that one of the things why there's not a lot of other civilizations is the lack of oxygen in other areas. So fire.
Yeah. My personal take on it is I think we're just not sophisticated enough yet for anybody to care. I mean, any civilization who could actually get here is really not going to be interested in us. We can barely get to our own moon, much less anywhere else. It's like us going and visiting, a cave dweller somewhere. It's like, yeah, that might be interesting, but am I really going to go out of my way a few light years for it? Nah.
Well,
I mean,
I think that the
they have
last
anthropologists though, and the equivalent, xenoanthropologists who would want to see what do these guys
Yeah.
do in their caves.
and there have been many cases throughout our own history where a more advanced civilization visited a less advanced civilization because they wanted natural resources of some kind, which kind of goes back to what was said before about are other parts of the galaxy not rich in oxygen or in something that
Yeah.
somebody else might want. And I tell you what, it has never turned out good for the less developed civilization or group.
But you're
And the more
forgetting about all the
developed
souls that were saved.
Yeah.
Oh, your sense of humor is killing me there. Thank you.
Again, though, think about it this way. Once, so we're getting to the point where we're realizing, Earth isn't really all that unique per se, right? It's, may not be common, but it's, there's other planets out there. There's resources pretty much. Again, if a society can get here, right? If a society can physically get to us, the amount of places they could go to get the equivalent resource is basically unlimited. So, why would they bother?
But you're forgetting another another resource is gourmet food.
Yeah.
Why do you think of the cattle mutilation? It's a
What was the name
delicacy.
of that episode? To serve man.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let me go get my copy of How to Serve Man.
I need to jump in here, but I'm happy to let you guys continue to chat during our break, but I want to take a short break here before our presenter comes. And I'm going to just throw this slide up here as a placeholder there. I'm thinking probably by my time about 12:05, 12:06, something like that. Yeah, so it'll be 11:06 your time. So let's see, one quick thing before we jump up. Professor Gupta, would you like to share your screen? Just make sure that that's all working.
Sure.
And I will go ahead and undo this. I'm gonna put mine back up again when we're happy with yours. Go ahead and saw you for a sec there.
Can you all see this?
Yeah.
Let me make sure some of the videos play.
Okay. Sure.
Do you see things moving around a little?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, great. Yeah, I
Yep.
think we're
Okay. So it looks good. Okay, so we're gonna reconvene here in about I'd say about 6 minutes or so, and so I will put my time back up there, or my slide back up there again. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we are looking forward to your presentation on W.E.I.R.D Lab.
absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, guys, you can continue to
My sound started to crackle and now it's completely blank. Is anyone else experiencing that?
Yeah, I think that was
I
Zoom. It
had the
happened to me
crackling
too. It just came
cleared up.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that as well, but you're now loud and clear.
Some ham-fisted alien eavesdropping.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and restart recording, and I will welcome Professor Gupta. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to your unusually named lab, but it sounds like you do some really cool stuff there. So we're very excited to hear about this place and the work and research that you've been doing. And I'm going to I've been looking at your background. It looks like you've done a lot of interesting things. You know, MIT and Berkeley, and you've
Right.
been all over the place. Done lots of really been some really wonderful places. So thank you so much for joining us. And I will unshare my screen here, and you can go ahead and take over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
We are all yours.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. So hi everyone. My name's Abhishek. I'm an assistant professor at UW in computer science. And so I guess I think I'm the youngest member of the faculty right now, or second youngest. But I mostly work on an intersection of robotics and machine learning. And so today I wanted to kind of tell you guys a little bit about some of the work that, our group has been doing, my students have been doing mostly, and give you a little flavor of the problems we've been thinking about. And so maybe before I start, it'd be useful for me to understand, what level of technical detail should I talk at? So are we all computer scientists? Are we a mix of technical, non-technical? Like where does the group lie at, right? So
I would say that this group of people is all over the map. You've got
okay.
a lot of there's a lot of really smart people on here. Some of us know a thing or two. We know enough to be dangerous.
Okay.
And that's to a great extent. That's probably why most of us are doing robotics. Because it gives us an outlet
Right.
to do something that hopefully we don't kill ourselves in the process. So, but
Okay, got it. Okay, so I'll try to keep things mostly intuitive and understandable, and if you'll have an equation or two here and there, and I'll go through them. Um, but yeah, so to start off, let me introduce, my lab. I don't really do that much work. I just boss other people around. So these are the people that I boss around, and these are my students. And we're the W.E.I.R.D lab. So we currently have 9 PhD students and around 8 undergrads and a postdoc. And so we're pretty decent sized for only being in our second year. And yeah, we mostly work at problems at the intersection of machine learning and robotics. So we publish in machine learning venues and robotics venues and try to do a mix of both, right? And so we think that machine learning is going to be a solution to lots of fundamental problems in robotics. So, okay, so that's a little bit about us. And the goal of, my research and the research of a lot of my students is to build continually improving learning systems. And so what I mean by that is typically in a machine learning system, you start with a bunch of data, you stick it into a learning algorithm which says, let me learn the patterns in the data, let me learn how to map from inputs to outputs, and you deploy your system, right? So you have a vision system, language system, you have things like that. You learn how to go from inputs to outputs with something like supervised learning, and you deploy your system. What we're interested in is systems that continually improve, so systems that close the loop, right? So when you deploy your system, you're going to collect more data. Some of the data is going to be good, some of it's going to be bad. And you want to be able to use that extra data in order to improve your system. And so the longer your system spends interacting with the user or interacting with the end, end deployment case, the better you want it to become, right? So we're trying to build continually improving learning systems that can collect their own data and get better with experience. And we think that's going to be important because systems are never going to be perfect on deployment. The world changes too much. And so if you have systems that are able to continue to improve themselves, that's likely to scale better than things that are just static. Okay, so how do we approach it? We approach it with this tool called reinforcement learning. And so reinforcement learning is commonly seen in things like psychology, right? Or Pavlovian, Pavlovian experiments are really illustrating reinforcement learning. So often the way you train your dog, or I don't have a kid, but I imagine the way you train your kid to do things is through positive and negative reinforcement, right? So you would kind of formalize it as having an agent in the world, right? So the agent is an intelligent decision-making system, which observes states of the world, S, right? And decides what actions to take, A. And then you get some reward telling you how good or bad your actions were in the world. And then the world transitions to a new state, right? And so this is a formalism called Markov decision processes that we use for a lot of our work. And the idea is to say you're continuously acting in the world, you're taking states, you're taking in states, you're deciding what actions to take, you're playing those actions, you're getting new states, and you're repeating, right? And the goal here is to accumulate as much reward as possible. So for, a dog is going to be to accumulate as much food as possible. For an academic is going to be to accumulate as much prestige as possible. For a robot, it might be to we're going to define a reward function and we're going to say, try to pick up, you wanted to clean up paper clips off the floors. Like how many paper clips have you cleaned up is your reward, right? You want to maximize your reward. And so your framework of reinforcement learning goes in this loop of interacting with the world, getting next states, rewards, repeating, and you're trying to figure out the mapping from the current state to the action in what you call a policy so that you maximize the reward, right? So you want to find the policy that maximizes the sum of rewards that you get in the world. So that's what reinforcement learning is, right? We don't need to understand it in too much detail, but just keep this this loop in mind, right? This agent environment loop. Now, why is reinforcement learning useful? Well, it's useful because you can learn without requiring a pre-provided model of the world. You don't need to know exactly how the world works. You don't need to know exactly where everything is. You just need to be able to interact with the world, right? So it's learning through interaction. So it's relying on data rather than relying on hand specification and lots of domain knowledge. Secondly, it potentially makes it easy to acquire new skills because in principle, what this allows you to do is drop your robot into an environment, run this agent environment loop, keep acting in the world, collecting rewards, and you should get better, right? And this kind of gets at this goal of continual improvement. So if everything works as, I've advertised, then you should continue to improve at test time. And so that kind of gets at this goal of building continually improving learning systems. So really you want to drop your robot in the world, leave it running, it collects data in the world, and it gets better as it gets more and more and more reward. Does that kind of make sense as a framing?
Yeah. So a question I have. So have you found that if you set a robot in a any kind of random environment, does that actually happen? Do you get that positive learning
Right.
in most environments?
That's what the whole talk is going to be about. How it's not.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be quiet.
Yeah, no. That's an excellent question. But um, let's see where it does work, right, to start. So if you've seen, some of these big results, maybe from 2018, 2017, 2019, things like Atari games, or there was AlphaGo, which is a big thing, and lots of simulated characters right now, they use reinforcement learning to get their strategies, right? So they find that reinforcement learning techniques are able to learn gameplay better than, superhuman experts. And so reinforcement learning has been extremely successful in things like games and simulation. But it's been relatively less successful in domains that we might care about, like robotics, or recently it's become more successful in language, in this whole like LLMs, this whole reinforcement learning from human feedback thing that's been coming up. But in general, it's been less successful in real world domains like education or healthcare or robotics, right? And so what I want to, kind of shed a light on is why that is and like what we're trying to do to address that. And we're specifically going to talk about robotics, right? So one question to ask is, should I use reinforcement learning in a domain like a factory? Like I have a factory, should I be like trying to throw in my robot and have it learn through trial and error? The answer is probably not, right? So if you have a factory which is pretty controlled and pretty structured, you don't really want to be using an algorithm like reinforcement learning. Where it is useful is in unstructured environments or minimally structured environments, things where you have lots of diversity, variability, or complexity, right? So things like your home, your offices, your hospitals, where it's hard to, control the world and people are in it and it's moving and it's changing and the number of things you have to interact with is too many to hard code. Right, in those kinds of environments, the bet that you're making is that improvement is easier than coding in all possible situations. Right? And so the hope is that you do some amount of pre-training, you get your robot to be reasonably good, then you drop it in the environment. The environment might change, but the more you interact with the environment, the better you're going to become, right? And this really makes sense in these environments which are diverse, variable, and complex. So this gives us this, like in again, I haven't really described whether it works or not yet, but if everything worked as I am advertising, then it would give us this continual improvement in the real world. I see a question. Oh, yeah. The Disney robots are trained with RL, yeah. Okay, so so a difference between stuff like the Disney robot that you're mentioning and stuff that I'm talking about is I'm talking about reinforcement learning directly in the real world, and a lot of these algorithms for, like a lot of the deployments of reinforcement learning have been training and simulation and getting controllers in simulation and then trying to deploy them in the real world. So I guess what I'm thinking about is when you deploy the reinforcement learning agents to collect data directly in the real world and not in a simulator. And I think that that realizes a unique set of challenges. Right? Okay, so if we think about, this promise of reinforcement learning versus where it kind of is, it's a little underwhelming, right? So like examples of reinforcement learning systems that we have today or, relatively kind of recently are some things that look like this. And they're like kind of restricted in the tasks they can do. They're kind of simplistic. You can see in some cases you have to have a green cloth to block things out, and you have to have a restricted workspace or a human babysitting the system. And so it kind of doesn't deliver on this promise of general purpose robotics that I've talked about, right? And it's not because the people who are trying it aren't smart, it's because there's some fundamental challenges in the system, right? So to understand what the fundamental challenges are, let's try to understand the difference between a system where reinforcement learning has been extremely successful, so something like an Atari game or a video game, and something like a robot where things haven't been as successful. So I'm going to argue that the differences here that make it fundamentally different are that in an Atari game, you easily know what your reward is. There's a score which tells you if you're doing good or bad, right? But with the robot in the real world, there's no score that's telling you if you're doing good or bad. In an Atari game, you have unlimited free data, right? So you can just keep running your Atari game, parallelize it across a ton of computers. The data is free. It's a simulator, right? But in robot data is expensive. You break the robot, you break the environment, you break the human. You can't, you don't want to do any of that. And then in an Atari game, you have complete control over the state of the game, right? So if you finish your episode, you want to reset it, you reset it, right? So you can set it to wherever you want. Whereas in things like robot learning, the world is the world. You can't reset it to wherever you want, right? So you can't like magically teleport the world to wherever you'd like. And so there's like these fundamental challenges, or these fundamental differences between domains like games and domains like robot learning. And I'd argue that a lot of these mismatched assumptions are what makes these things like Atari games much more successful than robot learning, right? And our algorithms fundamentally rely on these mismatched assumptions, and this reliance is what makes things hard. Okay, so what it boils down to is that if you have a data-driven system or data-driven algorithm, it needs the right data, right? If you don't have the right data, if ChatGPT didn't have the right data, you're screwed. If robots don't have the right data, you're screwed. If you vision systems don't have the right data, you're screwed, right? And so we need to think about what does data mean in the context of robot learning, and how do we get this type of data, right? And what are the challenges that we might see in trying to get this type of data? And so it's a little bit different than, you typically think of machine learning as you have input, output pairs, you have X's and Y's, you take in X's, you output Y's. But the challenges in robot learning are a little more unique, right? So let's try and unpack that a little bit. So in robot learning, you typically have the environment taking in states of the world S, taking in action, and then deciding actions A. World transitions to a next state S prime and gives you a reward R, right? So you have these S, A, R, S prime tuples. And let's say you have n of these tuples, right? And let's say the probability distribution that you drew these tuples from, which is basically describing where you got the data from, let's call that P, right, for the sake of notation. So we're going to have S, A, R, S prime tuples. You're going to have n of those tuples, and you're going to have them drawn from some distribution P, which is describing what is the strategy you took to collect the data, right? And so we're going to say here that the difficulty in collecting the right data really lies in collecting the right supervision, which means collecting the right R, collecting the right distribution, that means collecting data from the right regions of the space, which is the right P, and ensuring that you're able to collect enough data, which is getting the right N, right? And so you need to get the right R, the right P, and the right N in order to make sure that these robot learning algorithms work. And the assumptions that Atari games have, the things where your scores are available, the things where you can reset the game, things where you can get infinite data, make the collection of R, P, and N easy. And in robots, where you can't do that, and the world doesn't magically teleport, collection of R, P, and N is difficult. Right? And so that's the way we think about why robot learning is difficult and how to tackle those challenges. Any questions here? Okay, great. So I'm going to try and divide my talk into three sections. The first about how do we collect data from the right distributions. Second about how do we ensure that we're getting the right supervision. And the third about how do you ensure that you can continually collect data so you can get the right N. So that's the first section is about P, second section is about R, third section is about N. Right? And how are we doing on time? Okay, great. All right, so let's start by thinking about distributions, right? And so these are the students who did the work, not me. Any questions about it? I'm happy to connect you to my students as well, and they're happy to answer questions. All right, cool. So the first question we want to think about is distributions. That's a distribution is kind of a weird word, so let's try to unpack that. So let's say you have a robot in a kitchen. The task is to put the kettle on the stove, right? You want to put the kettle on the stove, but you spend all your time banging your arm into the cabinets. If you're banging your arm into the cabinets all the time, do you really learn anything about, putting the kettle on the stove? Unlikely, right? So the important question of distributions in reinforcement learning is how do you explore effectively enough to collect the data in the regions that are relevant to your tasks of interest, right? And how do you do this in a way that is safe and efficient enough to be practical for real-world deployment? Right? So how do you collect the right distribution P in a way that's safe and efficient? Now, in an Atari game or a simulated character, you can do crazy stuff. Like for instance, on the bottom here, this is an actual reinforcement learning run. You can see that it learns how to walk, but if I had a humanoid robot do that, I would be out of, $2 million in 5 days. And so that's completely impractical as a training scheme for the real world. And when you apply it to real world systems, you see that things happen like you bang into the cabinets and you really are not really collecting that much useful data for putting the kettle on the stove. And so both because you're in an environment which is, cost sensitive and fragile, and because it might take too long to run in the real world, you can't speed up the real world 100x, right? The challenges of real world data collection are not the same as the ones in simulation. And so what we really want to do is try to figure out how to offset the cost of real world data, right? So on one hand, you have reinforcement learning from scratch, which we just talked about is going to take infinitely long, right? On the other hand, you have, if you've seen Tesla's recent Optimus things or a lot of the buzz in the robot learning community in the recent 6 months to a year is on large scale imitation learning, which is humans provide you expert data, you copy the expert data, right? But that's far too expensive. You can't cover every scenario in the world, right? Or I don't think you can, right? So you want something that lies in between where you say, okay, you're going to have a small amount of human effort, and that's going to significantly bring down the cost of autonomous data collection. And so you want to find that sweet spot in between. And so really, we're going to try and change our problem statement a little bit to make it easier. So, if you don't know how to solve a problem, make it easier. It's always the trick to machine learning, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to assume that a small amount of data is provided up front. And this data doesn't need to be expert data. It just needs to be data that is, collected in the environment in some sort of targeted way, but we are not going to make the assumption that that data is optimal. And we're going to see how can we use that small amount of pre-collected data in order to make this reinforcement learning problem easier, both in terms of efficiency and safety. Yeah. Okay, so that's the question we're going to ask. How do we bootstrap reinforcement learning algorithms from prior data in order to make them safe and efficient? Great. So we're going to go into a little bit of math here, and I promise it'll be less mathy after this. But the idea here is that we're going to use an idea called off-policy reinforcement learning. So when you typically think of reinforcement learning, you're saying, okay, you're going to do trial and error learning in an environment, right? So your agent lives in the world, collects some data, you see which data is good, which data is bad, use that to improve your behavior, and then you repeat, right? And that is what you typically call on-policy reinforcement learning. What off-policy reinforcement learning allows you to do is it says, don't just use your latest collected batch of data. You can use arbitrary prior data, right? And so you can say, okay, I'm going to use arbitrary prior data. And this seems like magic, but the key is this thing called a Q function. And a Q function basically says how good is a particular action to take at a particular state S, right? So a higher Q function means I should take that action more at that state S. A lower Q function means you should take that action less at that state S, right? And so we're saying off-policy reinforcement learning essentially works by trying to compute this Q function. And once you know Q function, you just try to pick things that have higher Q functions more and lower Q functions less, right? And typically, you just want to compute your Q function using a variant of dynamic programming. Like, so right from your, it's the same idea as like classic dynamic programming, but this picture kind of explains what's happening, right? So imagine that you had a series of states. What you're trying to do is you're trying to propagate high value states backwards in the chain, right? So you're saying, let me find something that is high value. And to figure out how good a particular Q function is, I'm just going to use a dynamic programming update to propagate value backwards. Right? So all things that lead to high value things will have high Q values, and all things that lead to low value things will have low Q values. Right? And so, there's been a huge amount of literature in reinforcement learning. Everything that you see on these Atari games, AlphaGo, all of them try to use algorithms like this. Right? And they typically try to say, we're going to try and learn these Q functions. These Q functions are going to tell me how good is a particular action at a particular state, and then pick the actions that have higher Q values more. Right? Does that make sense? Don't worry about the equations too much. Just the intuition is the important bit, right? Okay. So the idea of off-policy RL is that. And the way you can, bootstrap from prior data is to just learn your Q functions from prior data. You just take a prior data set, someone's handed you a bucket of data, right? Maybe a human has collected that data or someone else has collected that data before. You've had failed experiments from your past. Collected the data, you've given it your off-policy reinforcement learning algorithm, and you try to learn your Q values so that you can, bootstrap from this data. Now, the problem that happens is when you try to do this, you actually see a huge dip in performance, right? So you started off pretty good, and then you have this huge dip in performance. So red is bootstrapping from prior data, and green is basically starting from scratch. So I had all this prior data. I should be doing better, but I'm really doing no better than if I started from scratch, right? So what gives? I told you it was going to be better, and then turns out it's not actually better, right? So what gives? And so what we found is that if your data doesn't have complete coverage, as in you don't cover all possible states and actions that you could see, right? Then your data has holes in it. And if your data has holes in it, that means that your machine learning algorithm can assign arbitrarily high or low values to those things that have holes. Right? And when you have arbitrary high or low values in those things that have holes, that propagates back into your machine learning algorithm and screws up the whole thing. Right? So pictorially, what this looks like is that you had a hole in your data shown here in red on the bottom, right? Because you just didn't have data in that region. So because machine learning is trying to learn like a function that goes from inputs to outputs, it's never seen those inputs before, so it assigns an arbitrary value to them. If it's assigning an arbitrary value to them, that arbitrary value is in our dynamic programming update is propagating through the rest of our chain, which totally screws up the values everywhere else, right? And so what's happening now is that when your data has complete coverage over everything, you're golden, but humans are collecting the data. So the data has holes in it. And the more holes the data has, the worse the thing gets because your holes are propagating through your algorithm, right? And so the intuition being, we want to do dynamic programming to learn off policy, to learn these Q functions, but the Q functions are screwed up by holes in the data, right? And holes in the data make your Q functions wrong. If your Q functions are wrong, you have this huge dip in performance. So really what I like to see is I start off pretty good, and then I keep getting better. But what you actually see is you start off pretty good, huge dip in performance, and then you're no better than learning from scratch, right? And so that kind of sucks, right? I want to do better than that. And so what we did is something extremely simple, right? So the main thing to take away here is that the simple thing that we did is we said, if things have holes in them, don't propagate them, right? So we said, don't propagate things that are very far away from the data that you've been provided. So if things have holes in them, don't propagate them, right? And so what that leads to is a situation where you actually don't propagate things that have holes in them. And as a result, your Q functions remain good. And if your Q functions remain good, you get learning that continues to get better. You don't have this huge dip in performance, right? And so the key point to take away here is that learning from prior data in things like language or computer vision is different because you don't have this dynamic programming propagation, right? Whereas in things like robotic learning, you're using this dynamic programming update where the holes in the data become much more of an issue, right? And so if people ask you, how do you bootstrap from prior data in computer vision, you train your algorithm and then you add some more data and you keep training. If you want to figure out how to do it in robotic learning, you need to be a little more careful about it and make sure that you're not propagating holes in your data. I see a question. How do you identify a hole? That's a great question. So to identify a hole in your data, you use a density model, right? So a density model is something that takes in your prior data and then tries to model the likelihood of your prior data. So it's like it's what you call a generative model or a density model. And that generative model basically is something that labels which data is likely and which data is not likely. And you use that as a signal to identify the holes in the data. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So enough of these algorithms. Let's look at some videos, right? So if you consider some simplified examples in simulation, we have these robotic hands trying to open doors. You can see that, in just 10 minutes of or 30 minutes of training here, you can get to 88%, whereas like older algorithms are stuck at 1 or just 1 or 2%. And perhaps it's informative to look at these curves. In most cases, you'll see that our curves, which are in red, continue to go up, right? Where a lot of other things have dips or don't continue to go up. But this is more exciting when you look at it on physical robots, right? So we considered a few different examples. So trying to like, rearrange and pick up this little object on the bottom, or trying to open a cabinet on the top. And if you do reinforcement learning from scratch, you can see the exploration is kind of, inefficient, unsafe, might hit things. But if you start training with this algorithm where you identify the holes and stay away from them, you can see that in around, 45 minutes to an hour, you see some progress. In around 2 hours or so, you start seeing success happening, right? And then the final learned performance you see is able to actually successfully solve the task while learning completely in the real world. So these trials are all taken in the real world, and you can see that you learn a lot faster than if you started from scratch, right? So a general recipe, if you want to do reinforcement learning, is always start from prior data, but be careful about how you use it. Right? That's the main point to take away here. You can apply it to other systems too. It's really a system agnostic algorithm. You can apply it to different hands, different arms, things like that, right? And so we then try to apply it to, a kind of cool system that some of my students built, which is a chopsticks robot, right? So we had this little chopsticks robot, and it's a robot arm with little chopsticks at the end, which you can grab, and you're trying to use it to like grab this little hanging ball over here, right? So you're going to let it train with reinforcement learning, bootstrapped with prior data. And you can see that the training process looks something like this, right? So it's really, I tried to do it myself with these chopsticks. It's extremely hard. I absolutely suck at it. My students are better, but it's still very hard to do. And so you need around, I think, 60 minutes of fine-tuning in the real world, where you keep practicing how to do things in the environment. And what makes this task hard is that the ball is dynamic, right? It can move. It's on a string, right? So it can move. You can have disturbances, and it has to be extremely precise because there's no things in the environment to support the ball. And so you can see that we actually got it to work in a variety of scenarios. So we're able to do things that are, have disturbances, you're able to pluck cherries from leaves that are blowing in the wind. You're able to grab things floating on water or on this like unstable magnetic sand, things on piles. So things that require high levels of precision, which, are really hard to model otherwise. But if you just use real world experience, you're able to get better and better and better. I see 2 questions. Go ahead.
I just actually wanted to call attention to Bernardo's question because I think that's a really interesting question. But I'm also kind of curious what the backstory is on how you decided to use chopsticks. That's a fun tab.
So the chopsticks came from I think my student was a huge fan of Bruce Lee, I think, and she wanted to grab flies out of the air with chopsticks, and so she's been building this robot for a couple years now, and they've been trying lots of different techniques, largely using classical robotics algorithms. And when I got to UW, she was like, "Do you think reinforcement learning can help us?" And so that's how we started this project.
So this is Bruce Lee's contribution to robotic systems. That's great. And then the question from Bernardo was about the prior data and how it was obtained. Was it teleoperation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in this particular case, we actually obtained the prior data from a mix, um, from a mix of teleoperated data and simulation data. So we had some data from simulation, which was less accurate, and some data from teleoperation, which is more expensive but more accurate. And so it's a mix of those data. And the nice thing about these algorithms is that you can throw in whatever data you want. Definitely better data helps, but the data can be from mixed sources. They don't have to be from particular sources, as long as they're in the right format, right? Of state, action, next state, reward. All right, so those are some fun videos, and she then got it to pick up some cherries from milk and grab some tofu and grab chilies from a pile, and she had fun with it. And the system is pretty efficient, pretty quick to learn, and we weren't able to really get it to work any other way. So in terms of fine manipulation, this is like probably one of the most generalizable and accurate things we could do, at least to the best of our knowledge. But the key point I want you to take away is that prior data can help ensure that you can still use reinforcement learning to get better, but that data it collects is safe and efficient and from the right areas of the space, right? And this is, robotics is one useful domain, but where these algorithms are seeing A lot of use cases nowadays are in things like healthcare, where you have a lot of historically logged data, but you want to make better decisions than people did before. Or autonomous driving, where you can't, you like data is obviously very expensive, right? And so this class of algorithms is called offline reinforcement learning, and we've been pioneering some of these. Before we get to the next, I'll pause for some questions. Does that make sense? Did I lose everyone? Intuition makes sense?
I wanted to ask
Yeah,
what
so
format the
basically what
state
you're
data is in.
Sorry, that?
Sorry.
I missed that. Can you repeat?
I wanted to ask what form the state data takes.
What form of state does it take?
No, the data representing the state.
Uh-huh.
How is that represented?
So in some of these examples, there were images, right? So you go pixels to torques. And some of these examples, they are like vectors of joint positions and object positions. So you'll run like a pose estimator to know where the objects are, and it's just a vector of where the robot is and where the objects are. So in the chopsticks
Okay.
example, we had a pose estimator. In the hand examples before, we ran them from images.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we're all really disappointed that there wasn't a video of it catching a fly, but would
Yeah.
it be fair to say that the point here is that you are you're making the thing learn, like if you were talking to a human, right, you would say something like, keep trying with the methods that you're comfortable with, like don't go off into uncharted areas, just
Right.
keep trying to do the things that you've done before, that you've been shown before,
Exactly.
and don't try crazy things.
Exactly, right. So it's like in a way you can think of it as like imbuing common sense, right? And so like if essentially what happens is pre-training on prior data like this imbues common sense, but you don't get the details exactly right, and then use some real world experience to get the details right.
Can I just say that I love how an academic can use slides with just gob tons of very confusing math symbols on it to basically say, something that's very common sense like that. I think that's the special talent that we get from academics.
Yeah, you just obfuscation. Academia is all about obfuscation, you know. All right, so let me keep going. The second question that we thought about is supervision, right? So the question of what should I do? And this was work done actually by undergrad students, Max and Marcel, who are amazing. And so I want to highlight that a little bit. And so, we've been talking about states, actions, next states, and rewards, but like, what the hell are rewards, right? Like, where did they come from? Like, I think it's a fundamental question, because if you don't know what the rewards are, what do you optimize, right? Our tool is optimization, but if you don't know the objective, what do you optimize? And so in games, you have scores that are easily available, but in a robot in a kitchen, nobody's giving you a score, right? Or it's like hard to provide a score in a scalable way. There's no magical counter that's telling you what is higher and what is lower. And so what people typically do is that they use something like state estimation to set up like state estimation for objects in the world. Then they use some sort of reward programming and domain knowledge. So, the 200 RL experts in the world get together, code up a complicated reward function, and then that reward function is deployed to do reinforcement learning. But the problem is that this becomes extremely expensive to do for every different problem, right? So if I have to like set up a state estimator, use extremely expert knowledge to set up a reward function, only then can I get to reinforcement learning. I might as well just do it myself, right? And so the question becomes, how do I make this process of reward supervision a lot more scalable and practical so I can apply it across multiple problems over and over and over, right? And so the question we were thinking about is, how do we scale up reward supervision in a way that is compatible with like hundreds of tasks, and not relying on this expert domain, domain knowledge or state estimation that becomes hard to scale. And so the way we were thinking about it is, what we really care about is not reward. What we really care about is what the human wants, right? You guys were talking about alignment right before I got here, which is, a fascinating topic. But alignment makes this point, right? Alignment says that, you're gonna have systems, utility-driven systems, rational systems that are given a utility function or a reward. but the reward is not what you really want. The reward is a lossy expression of what you really want. And so the human actually wants something. They're gonna try and write it down. They're gonna write it down in a kind of stupid way, right? And then you have a loop, and the human's gonna be like, ah, that's not actually what I wanted. And you're gonna change your reward functions. You're gonna go in this loop of human specifies, robot optimizes, you repeat, right? And so you go in this loop, and really the goal of any machine learning AI, system should be to maximize what the human wants, right? That's the goal. Or I think that's the goal. And so all reward functions is an abstraction in service of that goal. So if you have a reward function, then you can kind of abstract away the human in a way and use the tools of optimization. But since we don't have a reward function, I think we need to like open this black box a little bit and try to understand how do we get these rewards. And so if the human is really the important thing, what we need to figure out is, let's say a human provided some data of the task that they want you to perform. We want to design reward inference algorithms that are able to take this data that the human provided and then provide an interface between that and a machine learning system, right? So humans are going to provide data in some form. We haven't talked about what the form is yet. Then we're going to try and build reward inference algorithms that take this data and give you rewards that are compatible with all of these tools that we built in optimization since, Kalman in like 50s, right? And so, and the real questions we want to ask in this section are, what is the data that the human is going to provide? And how do you build reward inference algorithms that are accessible to everyone and scalable and, successful at solving complicated problems, right? Okay, so, so how do we infer reinforcement learning rewards from human feedback? That's really the thesis, right? How do we do RLHF? Okay, so we need to think about what is the purpose of reward, right? So this is going to get a little bit philosophical, but really the purpose of reward, let's consider this like maze environment, right? So this maze environment, you start at the middle, you have to get to the right in this little square. And the purpose of reward is twofold. The first purpose of reward is it tells you what is good, right? So what is a successful state? And the second purpose of reward, it actually tells you how to get there, right? So you're not in a system where you can teleport. You have to take actions in the world. And so you need guidance on where to go, right? You can't just be told, this is successful and magically reach there. So typically, reward is used for two purposes: to tell you what is successful, what is good, and how to get there, right? And so these two purposes kind of interact in interesting ways, right? So the question of what is successful or not is saying that, okay, this is a success state, and like something like that on the left is not a successful state, right? And so it is just trying to classify between things that are successful and things that are not successful. And this is kind of easy when you have low dimensional states. So someone asked me a question about what is the state vector, right? So if the state vector was the position of the object, you can just put a little, a little boundary and say, okay, if the object is in here, it's successful. But in lots of cases, it's hard to identify where all the objects are in the world, do accurate pose estimation, right? And so when you're going from images, this becomes a lot more challenging. And then the second question of how to get there is the more tricky one, because how to get there is how do you guide exploration? So the agent is exploring the world, trying to figure out how to get somewhere, and the reward is guiding you through the maze to figure out how to get there. So the reward is slowly increasing along this path so you can kind of like follow your nose to get to the goal, right? And this becomes difficult because often providing the reward shaping can be as difficult. So the reward shaping is just this guidance for exploration. And providing this can be as difficult as solving the task sometimes, right? And if you do it wrong, it can totally derail you. For instance, you do it wrong and you tell the agent that this state right here is the good one, not this one. Then you get stuck on the other side of the wall, right? So bias becomes a huge problem. So when humans try to write down reward shaping, you often get it wrong. And when you get it wrong, you get stuck at things that you don't want to get stuck at. Even if you're able to identify successful states, if your exploration guides you the wrong way, you get stuck, right? And so we have these two goals of how to identify success and how to get there. And rewards kind of fulfill both, right? Now, the problem is it's hard to, specify success from images, and it's hard to like write down these reward shaping things without tons of domain knowledge. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try and use an extremely simple medium, right? We're going to just use comparisons. We're going to say, hey, human, I'm going to give you these two states. Tell me which one is closer to the goal. Were there any questions? No, okay. Okay, so human is going to say, okay, you've shown me these two states. I'm going to tell you that, the second one is closer to the goal. Do with this as you will, right? So you can ask them for binary comparison. So you pose two options to them and they try to tell you which one is better, right? So standard this common in economics, right? And nowadays common in language models. But the idea is you learn reward functions from binary comparisons. And binary comparisons pretty much anyone can provide, right? If you're able to judge whether you're getting closer to the goal, then that's all you need. It's not an expert interface. You don't need programming. It's an interface with a left, right, I don't know button. That's it, right? And don't worry about the math too much, but it's like a formula from economic choice theory, but it's called the Luce-Shepard model. But all that the Luce-Shepard model says is that things that are preferred more will have higher reward, and things that are preferred less will have lower reward. That's it. Simple, right? And so all we're going to say is that we're going to get a bunch of binary comparisons from people, right? These are like preferences on what they prefer to be better than what else. And then you're going to try and get a reward function from them by just, optimizing this reward function, which just says that things that are preferred more will get higher reward and things that are preferred less will get lower reward. That's it, right? And so this satisfies both your goals of success identification and reward shaping, because the thing that is like preferred the most will have the highest reward, and things that are preferred, you'll try to prefer things that are on the path to the goal more. And hence you get these like nicely shaped reward functions. So you both figure out how to identify success and how to guide yourself towards the goal, right? So this is nice because it's simple and easy to provide, and you don't need to instrument the world. You can just do this directly from images. You don't need to like code it in anything. And you do images and you just ask people to compare images, right? That's it. But the problem here is that often if you use this directly as the reward, you get pretty bad outcomes, right? So you can see here that this is what we tried this directly, and you see it's trying to open the cabinet over there, and it does and maybe it kind of gets there, but it doesn't do it very well, right? And actually the goal here is to open the cabinet and the microwave, and it gets kind of stuck, right? So the problem is that the rewards can both be, oh, sorry, my Zoom is misbehaving. Give me a second. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So if you have people giving you, we tried to do this with people off the internet. So we took our robot, we hooked it up to the internet, we asked people to give it labels. And the problem here is that people are not actually as good at binary comparisons as you think they are. And so as a result, they provide things that are biased, right? And that bias results in guiding you incorrectly in exploration. And so this bias reflects poorly, doesn't let us solve our problems, doesn't let us do these two things that we want. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to try and use human feedback more effectively by decoupling these two purposes of the reward, the success identification and reward shaping. In success identification, we're going to use an idea called self-supervision. And in reward shaping, we're going to use the human feedback for softly guiding how to explore, but we're not going to treat it as ground truth. We're just going to use a soft guidance, right? And the idea here is that success identification would not need a human and does not incur bias, and reward shaping, because its soft guidance, can be overcome through more and more exploration, right? And so the idea is humans provide binary comparisons. They tell you which thing is better than which other thing. That tells you how to do things, but the reward functions can be wrong. So you decouple these two things of success identification and reward shaping, and this lets you solve pretty complicated problems. Okay, I'm running short on time, so I'm going to skip some of the details. But let me show you what the interface looks like and what the resulting results look like, right? So you can see here my student Marcel, he's trying to provide some of these labels. So this interface over here, you show videos of the robot doing things, right? And then you ask the human to label which one do they prefer. The thing on the left, the thing on the right, or I don't know, right? And so if they're able to provide some labels that are pretty good, then you can actually get these robots to perform tasks successfully, even if the human is not present all the time, even if the human is noisy, even if the human is not an expert, it's just random people on the internet. I asked my mom to do it. She was great. Like actually, we asked my mom, my grandma we tried all sorts of demographics, and you're able to get it to solve pretty complicated tasks in simulation. Complicated because you have to explore the maze carefully, or you have to like solve these multitask kitchen environments, right? And we're able to get it to solve tasks in the real world. So you can get it to draw different shapes in the real world, or rearrange objects in the real world. And what we did here is we left the robot here. We connected to the internet. We went home. We came back, and people on the internet had taught it to, rearrange socks or draw shapes on the table and so on. And we didn't curate the people. We just like the nice part about our like decoupling procedure is that you can get people who are non-experts to do it, and you can get it from very occasional feedback. You don't need to have feedback all the time, right? And so that's pretty neat. And this is a little bit about the demographics of the people that we had. Of course, we had a lot of people from the US, but you can see my mom and grandma provided lots of labels from India. And then we had some people from Spain too. And so we had people all over the world providing feedback to these robots and learning from them. So that was pretty neat. Yeah, so that's just one way of doing things. We could also think about getting rewards from other sources. So things like video. Sorry, I think there's a question. Do you see a difference between men's and women's approaches? That is a good question. I do not know the answer. That is a good question. I will find out. But I expect there to be, right? So some of the things we're thinking about now are, what we did in the previous work is we basically said that any divergent preferences that people have, we're going to chalk down to irrationality. Right, so we're like people are going to probably prefer to do the task the same way, and anything else, anyone who diverges from that is irrational. But we know that's obviously not true, right? And so some of the things we're thinking about now is, okay, men and women prefer to do the task differently. How do we give the robot the knowledge of that so that the robot can also do it differently, right? And so we've been trying to think about those questions, but no results yet, right? And so just to quickly touch on things, these are not the only ways you can infer rewards. So rewards from human feedback is one. You can also learn rewards from video. So we had some work trying to take raw videos of humans doing things and try to get reward functions from them. So like learning from YouTube kind of things. We have examples where you just take pictures of what success looks like and try to learn rewards from them. And then you have some cases where you try to learn without rewards. So you try to have, how babies play around in the environment and explore without rewards, unsupervised. And we've been trying to play around with those algorithms too. But really the important point to take away here is that rewards are super important. And you need to know what rewards are to solve problems, some way or the other. And human-in-the-loop feedback, if done correctly, can provide a somewhat scalable way to provide supervision in real environments. And this is going to see lots of uses in domains like dialogue, through things like ChatGPT, and in domains like education, where it's much easier to provide preferences than write down like formulaic reward functions. Yeah, that was section 2. Any questions? Sometimes good solutions. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think actually democratizing these systems and allowing lots of people to interact with them can provide like unique and robust solutions that are better than anything we do. Like me as a roboticist has a certain way of solving a problem, and I'm sure, my nephew will provide a much better solution half the time. And so the hope here is to really democratize a lot of robot learning. I am a little short on time, so I'm going to run through the last few the last section pretty quickly, right? But the last section we thought about was, okay, we've talked about how to get the right data distribution, which is the right P. We've talked about how to get the right supervision, which is the right R. And now we need to make sure that we collect enough of this data, right, to make it practical. So we're using deep neural networks for a lot of what we're talking about. So we need like lots of data. So if you need lots of data, is that easy to do? So these are some successes we see of reinforcement learning, right? Some from us, some from others. But if you peel the curtain back, you see they're all cheating, right? They're all cheating in different ways. And so, for instance, the one on the bottom, there's someone who comes in every episode, resets the puck, and then, then the robot can practice. So you're babysitting it. And the ones on the middle and the right, you have these like special reset mechanisms that you set up that resets the whole system, so that you can try over and over and over again, right? And so you often need careful instrumentation or intervention in order to solve these tasks. And so if you want to collect data autonomously at scale, you cannot have instrumentation or intervention, right? So instrumentation limits the applicable environments. I don't want to put motors inside my kitchen, which resets all the cabinets. It's crazy, right? Or if I have to like sit and babysit my robot all the time, then like that becomes completely impractical. I like have, you know, I have to go to work. So I really want my robots to learn on their own, learn autonomously, collect their own data so that they can scale. And the way that robot learning has been thinking about this is that they've been changing the environments to match the algorithms. And really what we need to do is we need to change the algorithms to match the environments. Like the real world is the real world. Like, I guess some people can. Like Toyota has been building a, you know, whole automated city, but most people want to operate in the real world. And so you need to change the algorithm so they operate in the real world, right? And so the question we've been trying to think about is how do we actually get algorithms that can reset themselves so that you can continue practicing, right? So for instance, in this puck example, if the robot hit the puck and then is able to reset itself so it could practice again, then you can try over and over and over again, right? And we saw in the previous sections, we can learn from images, we can connect our robot to the internet for rewards. So all it needs to do is reset itself so it can keep practicing, right? And so what I'm going to talk about in this section is how do we learn without episodic resets? So how do we learn without these people coming in the loop? How do we learn without getting stuck, right? And if you can learn without getting stuck, then the data scaling improves, right? Anytime you have a bottleneck in your data scaling procedure, that like completely blocks everything. So if I have to come and reset the cup to wherever it started from every time, it like scales with my own effort. Whereas if the robot is able to reset the puck or reset the cup, even if it is slower, I scale up data much more effectively. Any questions? What about a robotic puck? Okay. Um, that's uh that's a good question. So again, I think the question about a robotic puck is an interesting one, but it's instrumenting your environment, right? So if I want to operate with natural objects, you don't want to instrument your environment. And you could do it in certain cases. Like for instance, you could say while learning, use a robotic puck and then it'll learn how to operate with a regular puck because you don't need to get resets after you've learned how to do the thing, right? But it becomes practical in certain situations and not in others. Um, Right. So the idea we're going to think about is agents that are able to act in the world um, can actually reset themselves. So typically we've thought about this as humans have to reset the environment. So the robot tries, human resets, robot tries, human resets. But really, if an agent can act in the world, resetting is not that different than performing the task. It's actually just a different task, right? So imagine that you're trying to, you know, put the kettle from the stove into the sink. The forward task is taking the kettle from the stove, putting it into the sink. The reverse task is taking the kettle from the sink and putting it onto the stove, right? And so agents that can perform tasks often can also reset tasks. Now, of course, there's limitations to this. If you break a glass, you can't unbreak a glass, right? And so there's, of course, cases that are irreversible, but in a lot of cases, you can keep practicing by treating the problem of resetting as another task in itself, right? So you can think of the problem of, you know, going forward and backward as two different tasks, right? So you can say, okay, you want to go from the start to the goal, and then you want to go from the goal back to the start, right? And so this gives you both forward, you know, experience to perform the task and reverse experience to reset so you can keep trying. So imagine you are like picking up a cup, putting it down, picking up a cup, putting it down, repeating, right? And this lets you like practice from various conditions, how to be robust and how to learn how to do it, you know, all over the state space. Now, the problem is that if you naively apply this, you see that it performs pretty poorly as shown on the right. So we literally tried this example here. And if we took our algorithm from section 2 with the human comparisons, we see that it actually performs quite poorly, right? And so you can see that it goes and, you know, bangs into the wall and doesn't actually get to the goal, doesn't actually get back, gets stuck. Seems kind of weird, right? My question. Locking the simulation. Yes, very good question. The question is, another idea is locking the simulation to the real world. And then for every real world training point, generate 1,000 simulation points via random changes. We are doing exactly this, and we're submitting a paper in 10 days, which does this. And I'll send it to you guys when it's out. But I think it's super cool and it works really well. But that's great. Um, and so when we were trying to think about why this fails, here's an intuitive explanation of why it fails, right? So the problem is we tried to send it to things that we thought were high reward, but the things that are high reward from a human's perspective may not be reachable under the current state of knowledge of the robot. The robot hasn't figured out how to go everywhere in the world, but the human thinks that this thing is high reward. But what you really want to say is high reward under the current performance of the robot, right? But the human doesn't have a, like when I ask the human to compare two things and say which one is better, it's hard for the human to know what the robot is proficient at and not, right? And so as a result, a human will often direct the robot to go somewhere which is high reward for a perfect robot, but not high reward for a robot at some intermediate state of knowledge. And so you need to command the robot towards things that are both high reward and reachable, right? So you can't just tell the robot to go from here to here if it only knows how to go in this like little green region down in the bottom, right? And so the important thing during continual robot learning is that you have to take into account both reward and reachability, right? And so we're going to get reward from human feedback, like we talked about before, and we're going to get reachability through, a density model or generative model, like I mentioned in the first section, the thing that you used to find the holes in the data, right? And so the details aren't so important, but this graphic kind of like explains what happens, right? So you want to go from robot in the bottom right to, the cup in the top left. You do some random exploration while ensuring you're going to the highest reward point in the reachable space. And then when you get back to the goal, you can go back to the highest reward thing in the reachable space, and eventually the whole space becomes reachable, and this whole process becomes way smoother, right? And so the idea is you go forward, backward, forward, backward, forward, backward, but you make sure that you account for reachability and not just reward. Okay, so when you do this, you get a nice training procedure that looks like this. We had these different tasks like pushing blocks around or navigating in a room, right? And then, we left the robot in there, and you can see we actually connected to the internet, and we went home. And so we went home. It's learning, it's resetting itself, it's trying again. People on the internet are providing things they think are high reward, and the algorithm is balancing these high reward things with what things are currently reachable under the current policy, right? And then you eventually learn how to solve the problem this way. And you can do the same thing for navigating in a room, right? So we set up a little mini home and a mini kitchen, left the robot in there. We went home every 30 minutes or an hour. We check in on it, provide a few labels. And through those labels, it figures out which things are good. Through its experience, it figures out which things are reachable. It uses that to practice to keep getting better, right? It's kind of like simulated annealing. Yeah. Similar idea. Yeah. And so that was one type of algorithm that we tried, and that was able to, learn from autonomous experience. So the nice part is now, earlier I had to sit and babysit the robot. And so I was like kind of a pain to get it to learn anything. But now I just drop it in there. I connect it to the internet. I have a prompt saying, okay, teach the robot how to do X. I go home, and then it learns how to do these tasks just from its own experience and, the power of crowdsourcing in the internet, which I think is pretty cool. We try to apply this to more complicated problems too. So we try to apply it to problems like robot manipulation. So we want to do in-hand reorientation of this object. And so we had in-hand reorientation, but it keeps dropping the object. So then it practices how to pick the object back up. And so it takes around 50 hours this is a really high dimensional complicated system. It takes 50 hours to figure out how to pick the object back up. And then when it's picked back up, you can continue practicing. And then eventually you learn how to successfully solve the task, like picking it back up, flipping it over, and then reorienting the object in hand, right? So same principle. How do you guarantee that the process is not divergent? Very good. You don't guarantee that the process is not divergent. You try to provide resets occasionally to ensure that it's it's convergent. So whenever you see it, like we provide a reset every 2 hours or so, and every so often you kind of reset it. Now one thing that's tricky about these kinds of settings is because you don't know the model of the world, providing real guarantees is very difficult, right? Like if you don't know the model of the world, I can't really provide any guarantees. All of the guarantees from control theory, for instance, need models of the world. I don't know the model of the world. It's a new world, right? And so the guarantees we provide are pretty loose. But in practice, to prevent the accumulating error, often just providing occasional resets tends to help a lot. How do the vacuum robots do so well at mapping the room? Yeah, so the vacuum robots are interesting. The vacuum robots are a particularly simple example because the vacuum robots are just navigation problems, right? So we are trying to develop somewhat general purpose systems, right? So the general purpose system is applicable not just to navigation, but to manipulation, to mobile manipulation, to outdoor systems, whereas the Roomba is just performing algorithms like SLAM and path planning and so on. And those are very, very specific to problems in obstacle avoidance and mapping, right? And so I think it's like Roombas work really well because they're very domain specific algorithms, right? They're algorithms specific to the domain of navigation and mapping and localization. Whereas I think the algorithms that we're designing here are, are designed to be somewhat agnostic to those things, and you just plug in different cost functions and you should be able to solve it, right? But I will say that Roombas are more successful than anything that reinforcement learning has produced. So if I was to build a commercial robot right now, I would still use things like SLAM, things like motion planning, right? But reinforcement learning is getting better, and I think it's on the cusp of success. Let's say that. So here's another example we had for the hands. We also used it. We left it in the kitchen for a while. It was just playing around with things in the kitchen, learning how to open different cabinets, close different cabinets, turn knobs, and so on. And then eventually it learns to do these multi-step problems like open the cabinet, turn the knob, open the door, place things inside, and so on, right? And so all of this was the nice thing is I literally went home. I had a webcam looking at the robot, and we watched it learn for 200 hours, and that was pretty cool. So the point is that, if you want learning systems that are automated to get better, you need to figure out how to automate every portion of the system. You can't just have automated rewards, automated learning from images, but have humans in the loop for rewards, for resets. And so you have to figure out how to automate every piece of it, and then you get scalable data collection, right? So yeah, those are the three, the pillars of what we've been thinking about. And kind of some of the things that we've done have started to enable reinforcement learning, not just to be a tool for simulation or games, but actually to be a tool for doing things in the real world. Now, the real world is a spectrum, right? So there's the real world, which is the things that I showed, and the real world, which is like a child's playroom. And I think there's a big spectrum. And so some of the stuff that my lab has been doing in the last year or two are to try and scale these into like cluttered, dynamic, diverse, ever-changing environments rather than just the lab. And so we'll have more updates for you too. But yeah, I think that's mostly me, right? So when you're thinking about machine learning for things like robotics, think about supervision, distributions, and continual data collection. And when you want to scale this to the real world with real humans, that opens opportunities and challenges, which I think are exciting for research. But yeah, I'm happy to take questions. I see there are already some. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Gupta. That was that was pretty cool. Now, does your website have, or your lab website, does it have any kind of interactive portals that people can play with?
Honestly, we should have more, but we don't have enough because we're lazy academics. But one thing we've been playing around with is like it's really hard to get a feel for these algorithms unless you like can touch and you want to touch and feel them. And so one thing we've been trying to set up for our next batch of papers is interactive simulation things on the web where you can like we'll show you our controllers, you can mess with the environment and see how robust they are, see how performant they are. And I'm hoping we can do that in the next few months, but nothing that fun yet.
Does that so you're sometimes your robots can spend in dozens or even hundreds of hours learning to do some simple task. Does that take a lot of storage on your computer systems to capture all of that? And
Yeah.
is there a way to sort of condense that down to a more efficient, okay, the robot has learned how to do this. That becomes the foundation for learning to do more complex things?
Wonderful question. So this is really the big problem of continual learning, right? So when you have continual learning, there's this like big issue of catastrophic forgetting, right? So if you like have limited data storage, you tend to start forgetting the things that you've done before.
Yes.
So I guess my answer is twofold, right? Like one is that yes, we need a lot of data. Typically, we use like an NFS or something to store a ton of data. But in practice, what you often do is you can think of parameters, like you use neural networks, right? And you can think of your parameters as almost a compressed form of data storage. So like all of the data that you've seen before is almost compressed into your parameters. And so that is like a more efficient way to store things, but you still tend to forget. And so then there's algorithms that like, make sure that those parameters don't change so much so that you don't forget things that quickly. But it is a big open research problem in continual learning, how to not forget. But the way we do it in practice is we restrict the size of the data buffer that we have. So we start purging really old things, and then we use parameters as memory. I see two
Looks
hands.
like you got several questions online there. So go ahead.
I can go. Thank you for the talk in Seattle Robotics. I'm new to the group, so this is very interesting. Thank you. So my question is related to one of the questions that popped up in the middle of the presentation about like the state space. So let's say you have this cabinet, and then the task that your robot has is to like clear everything that's inside, and then your state space is like a vector for each of your objects, but you don't even know the objects that are there. How do you handle this, like, I don't know, maybe increasing number of states on the fly? And yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah. So I guess there's two elements to your question, right? The first element is partial observability, right? Like you don't know that there are you know that there's cups inside the cabinet, right? And from an observation, you don't know that. And so that's a problem you'd call, like, I guess typically you'd call partial observability, and partial observability needs a new type of framework, right? And so there's a framework. I talked about Markov decision processes. For partial observability, there's partially observed Markov decision processes, which are NP-hard. And so they're generally really hard to do. The way that you typically deal with partially observed systems, let's not account for the fact that number of objects can be varying. Let's just say that they're not observable. Let's say for a second, right? They're not observable, but they're not varying. In those cases, you can deal with it with just like keeping a history of all the things you've seen before, and then using algorithms like filtering in order to like maintain a belief state about where things might be, right? To your other question about things being uncountable, this becomes much more of a problem when you're using the state space of like object poses and object positions. But oftentimes in these settings, we're just using images as your state space. And so if images are just your state space, these are just more pixels, right? And so the way we deal with it, but with images comes more partial observability. And so the trade-off here is that images don't have countability problems, but they incur partial observability, because just from an image, you don't know where everything is, right? And so the way that we've been dealing with it in reinforcement learning is you use recurrent neural networks, and you use things that maintain history, and that allows you to have a belief over where things might be.
Got it. Thank you.
Jane?
So I just have to say real quick, that was an absolutely fantastic talk, and you're a really good teacher. I loved how you like simplified all of those concepts down. I also noticed that you ran long and that you skipped a bunch of stuff, so I think you should come back and pick up where you left off and finish that. I also have to say that I have to apologize kind of for my earlier snark about academics. Obviously, the real point there is that you can't just give that like common sense advice to a computer. If you can express the common sense advice in terms of like really, really complicated mathematics, then that you can actually implement. So, I was just being snarky.
No one is more snarky to academics than academics, so don't worry about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting community. I work with a lot of academics, so it's kind of fun. And poking fun in academia is a lot of fun. The question that I actually had was, you talked about sort of democratization of things a couple of times in the talk. And one of the things that really bugs me is that like in the hobby robotics world, which is kind of where we are with SRS and with a lot of other groups, there's a lot of people who like to build these little robots, small robots and things. It seems like there's just like a massive barrier to entry to be able to apply any of these absolutely fantastic solutions and systems to the kind of robots that we're able to build, right? Like I want to be able to apply everything that you just talked about to my little robotic arm or whatever. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts or do you see any value in like trying to in the time that it would take to document and handhold and whatever would be required to get like the wider hobby open source community to be able to actually apply some of this stuff. And thank you again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. That's an interesting question. So I think the tricky thing about academics doing it is that the incentives have to be correct, right? So, in the sense like I think so there's certain things that we can do much more easily. So certain things that we don't do, which we could do much more easily, is like open source our code, make the code easily runnable, provide examples on different platforms, right? And for some of the hardware that I'm using, for instance, like let me go back to like this hand, for instance, we built ourselves, or both of these hands we built ourselves. This little robot is like $4,000, right? So they're not very expensive on the like expensive robot scale, but they're still not like hobby robots per se.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
so, but we certainly can do better on documentation and accessibility that way, and we've been trying to. Now, in terms of like hand holding and so on, I guess the tricky part is a lot of the work is led by students, right? And for students, it's tricky because they're getting incentives from publications and they're getting incentives from like internships. And I've always found it tricky to like get students to want to engage. Because they're under lots of pressure to like, and I'm just trying to be completely honest here, right? It's like I would love to engage more, but I'm trying to figure out how to get the incentives to work for students, right? So some things that we do, which I think we can ramp up more of, is we do a lot of outreach in that we demo our systems already, right? To like kids and to people from underrepresented communities, and we try to like get the word out there. But if we had like demo days where people can come in with their robots and come in with their hardware, and we like have a demo day where we try to get some of our algorithms to work on your hardware, like I think that could be a pretty cool thing where the students get experience teaching, get experience showing their systems are experience showing their algorithms are robust, and get some points for like engaging with the broader community. I think that could really work well. Right? Let me actually bring that up with some of my students. That's a cool idea. Yeah. Yeah,
Are you guys in the SRS leadership hearing that? Like the pop can challenge, maybe we can demo that and get somebody in academia to help us train our robots to go grab us a can of beer. I mean,
that'd be awesome.
is there a more rewarding task than that? I don't,
I don't think the task is necessarily that. Like, I think at least for my brand of robotics, we're like more interested in getting the algorithms to do something because you know the bar is somewhat low than the particular task. So honestly, getting a beer from a fridge sounds awesome, and we would love to do that. And I think like some of the other things that we could do, I don't know what the logistics of this looks like, is we have like a bunch of unused robots. We are at UW, we have like 15 robots, like UR5s and Francas, and we have a Spot, and they just like are there and oftentimes unused. And if we could organize hack days where people can come in and hack with them, that could be fun, right? because these are like high-end, really good robots with good systems. And if we can provide access to some basic algorithms to start, that could be like a fun exercise. Let me write this down. Sorry.
Well, I think we should let Professor Gupta go. Thank you so much for your talk. That was really fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
Yes.
I think James is right. We may need to get you to come back here sometime and give us fill us in some more. I know an hour isn't a lot of time. And
Happy to do that. And
yeah,
yeah, keep up I think I peeped on the discussion a little bit before. It's fascinating, and yeah, I'm glad you all are doing this.
yeah.
Awesome. All right then. Thank you
All
again.
right.
Have a good Saturday.
Yes. You too. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna re-share my screen here momentarily. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. This was pretty cool. This is he does some fun stuff at his place there, and his suggestions about like hack days and stuff. That sounds like that could be an interesting thing. I don't know what all it would take to pull something like that together. But would be an interesting, be able to access some of those higher end robots and being able to play around with them. That sounds like that could be a lot of fun. Okay, I'm just quick run through here. So next same link next month. We'll either today or tomorrow probably I'll have the video for this today's meeting up on the web, but maybe longer. Depends on when I get around to it there. And yeah, if you got any feedback or other comments, any parting things, throw it in the chat there so that I'm actually going to be stopping recording here momentarily unless somebody has just got something the last second that they're going to throw in there. But we got lots of good stuff in the chat today, so you'll be able to see and access all of that stuff. So anything else that anybody wants to share before we or do you guys want to do there people want to hang out and chat for a while? I'm okay. Of course, I'm seeing it's 1:30 for me, so I mean it's like okay, it's past my lunchtime, but I'm willing to hang out here for a while if people are interested. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming to the meeting today, and I don't well, let's see. I don't normally. I'm usually busy until after these meetings are over on the Saturdays. So I probably will. I can watch it after the fact, but I can't join you live. So, but appreciate it's good to see all of you, and it's fun to. I always enjoy interacting with you guys. And it's I usually always learn something hanging out with this group. So. All right. Well, I will go ahead and stop recording here and